I do realize that the wine and cheese was planned for 5:30, and that's 13 minutes from now. And I'm in between that. And I'll give you an excuse, but because most of what I'm telling now, I also told at the World Biotics Conference a year and a half ago. So if you stand up now and leave, it's because you've heard it already. No sweat. On the other hand, Steve LeBlanc was sitting in the back. He heard that in Ontario. He's still sitting here. And he gave me a compliment afterward. It was somewhere late at night, but thanks for that, Steve. I go to talk to you a bit on what we just stopped with when Ron said that question about the quarter level drying off. That's more a behavioral thing rather than a scientific thing. And that's true. The reason I wanted to reply is I was very reluctant on implementing the quarter level thing because it is effective and it does help in further reducing antimicrobial use. But the reason we didn't work on it was that we had to implement the thing, the selective dry cow, at the whole country. So our approach was basically as simple as possible so that every farmer can implement it. And that's why we choose for somatic cell count at the last milk recording before drying off, because most farmers do have milk recording, and it's a simple approach. And you can make it more complicated. You can add culturing or even quarter level culturing or whatever kind of algorithm. You're allowed to do that, but the least that you have to do is look at cow level somatic cell count anyway. So that's about behavior and about implementing things. And it was quite a challenge. I just told you in my previous talk that I was advocating blanket dry cow therapy until 2009, and then suddenly had to change one day and say, okay, the color today is like in the Wizard of Oz. Today the color is selective, and we're going all to do that. It's about tubes and it's about bottles, but it's also about the mindset. And we learned that in our other health work. What we did there is that we sort of differentiated farmers. Farmers that basically are outward oriented or inward oriented. They're focused on their own farm or they focus on the outside world. And they basically trust information. People come to them. They basically trust that that's meant for them to help them, or they distrust information. They think basically an advisor does that for his own profit. And that's different types of people, and you have to approach them in a different way. And we worked on that model, and I forgot that my first slide, that I prepared this together with Jolanda Jansen, who is a former PhD student of mine, and those of you who are regulars at the NMC might have seen her before, and Roland Wessels, who is a companion animal veterinarian, and together we worked on veterinary communication stuff. But Jolanda, through the work with Jolanda, we really got further because her background is in social sciences, in communication science. And we developed this thinking about different types of people approaching in a different way into this model, which is called the reset model, which comes from some social scientists. And the idea is that you have different ways to approach people to change their mindset, their attitude towards different things. And what I'm going to tell you is how we use this towards antimicrobial use. But the same thing is true for other things, and that's rules and regulations, education and information, social pressure, economic incentives, and tools. And I'm going to explain you a bit more on all these 5 points. And the thing is that we often, if you really want to change things, we often think that we use these different tools for different farmers or different people, which is true. Some people are sensitive to rules and regulations, others to education. They want to know it before they want to understand it, the rationale, before they change their behavior. Others to social pressure. They change because everybody changes. Or economics, because they earn more money. Or finally, tools. If it's easy to do, then I will implement it. If you really want to change things, though, it's not putting your energy in either of these approaches, but in all of them. Because if you do that, then you will really get to the big group. Okay, why is that? That's because behavioral change comes through these different 5 points, these different approaches, rules, etc., where the strongest of them is the internal motivation, and that's in education. If people understand why things are important, then they're internally motivated and they really want to change their behavior. All the other approaches are external motivations, things coming from outside. First is the rules and the regulations. You enforce things on people. Your behavior has to change compulsory. That's strong. If things are forbidden, you will change. But often it only lasts as long as the rules are in place. If they're taken away, you're not internally motivated to do it and you'll change your behavior again. The others are also external motivation, and that's through circumstances. That may be norms and values, what we all think that should be done, that's rewards, that's devices and concepts and tools that are available. And there are also external types of, you're doing it not because you think it's really important, but because you can, or because you have some extra profit, or because other people think it's important. I'm going to give you an example on drinking and driving. Drinking and driving has really been changed. In the generation before us, it was pretty common to sit behind the wheel after you've had your alcohol. It was pretty cool to be on a party and then drive home. That has changed. And if you analyze it, and Jolanda and Roland and Nick have talked about this and compared this to the reset model that I just tried to explain to you, and we think it worked there. It's part of that too. And I'll show you a few pictures that all, we think, have contributed to this changed behavior. This one is on tools. It's an alcohol lock. You have to blow, and otherwise your steer doesn't work, so you cannot drive. This one has an effect too, because it worries you on what might happen. This one too. Don't drink and drive, because you'll see what the consequences are. These are the rules and regulations. Don't spend the holiday camping with Joe. Choose your ride. Drink, drive, go to jail. Next one is pretty impressive, I think. Or this one. If you look at it, if you analyze it, you see all kind of things of this reset model. It's intensive control, zero tolerance. It's information through those ugly posters. You don't want this. You really don't want this, because you realize, your rationale realizes what the consequences may be. There's also taxes and fines. There's an alcohol lock. There are media campaigns. Things are changing. I was just saying that in the old days you were cool if you were driving home after drinking. Now boozers are losers. So the total thing changed, and some people are sensitive to that type of information. Others only to camping with Joe, etc., etc. But at some point you reach a tipping point, and we don't do it anymore. Okay? It's even more complicated than this model. We thought of this model, but it's never the full truth. There are all kinds of relations in between. Okay, next step. Reset the mindset towards antimicrobial use. The goal of that, the ultimate goal, was to decrease antimicrobial use. That was it. So how was that possible? This slide I showed you in my previous talk. We were working on decreasing antimicrobial use, the critical important antimicrobials that were not allowed anymore, and no more preventive use of antimicrobials in healthy animals. Put it in the reset model. The first one was the rules and the regulations. I told you in my previous talk, 70% reduction in antimicrobial use. That was what the government said. You have to realize that. Clear norms on the antibiotic number. And Ron, yes, I'll be happy to discuss with you over a beer what the importance of that number is. We have much more information. Every farmer gets detailed information on different types of antibiotics, on different types of animals, etc., etc. But the basic thing is a number to start with. It's like bulk somatic cell count. It doesn't tell you a lot, but it gives you a starting point. Okay? You have a rule. If it's under 4, you're okay. If it's between 4 and 6, you have to be attentive. If it's over 6, you have to do something. Clear norms and regulations. Second is education and information, which is traditionally, I have to say that, overestimated by veterinarians. We, as veterinarian, I'm a veterinarian, we think once our farmers, once our clients understand why, they will change their behavior. Which is sometimes true for those people that have a learning style that is based on information. There are other things, like social pressure, like what's doing my neighbor. Is it practical? Is it expensive? It's not only the rationale behind it. After I did my PhD, I went to private practice. I had been working in Stavaris and all that stuff, and I've been explaining my clients all kind of shedding patterns and all that kind of stuff. And the part of the country, the eastern part of the country from the Netherlands where I worked, they're very nice people and very friendly, and they all said, yes, that's interesting. Well, they thought, come on, I have other things to do. It takes a while, but then suddenly you realize that it doesn't help. So the rationale is important, but not the only thing. We traditionally overestimate that. Nevertheless, we have to give it attention. And the work that we do, we try to do it as much as possible evidence-based. And I had the opportunity to work with a lot of people, but I want to mention two. One is Christiana, who I also mentioned in the previous talk. And this girl is Inge Sandman, who you never have seen at NMC, I think, but is a great girl, and she published a lot. She does a lot of review work for GDS too, and a great help in the scientific work that we've done. Okay, critically important antimicrobials. Our farmers didn't know why it was important not to use them. And the vets never told them, and they never realized either. So if you give that information, if you explain that some kind of antimicrobials may be very important in intensive care in the hospital too, farmers will understand. That helps. It does help. Social pressure. Social pressure is very important. And I often give this example, which is on tea dipping. This side of the pond, this side of the ocean, everybody is tea dipping. I've been to New Zealand a couple of times, and everybody is tea spraying there. Why? Because everybody does. It's the same germs, it's the same iodine, it's the same 4 teats per cow, but everybody does. And if you come in New Zealand, if you read the papers from New Zealand on tea disinfection, they don't even mention dipping. Spraying is the word. Whereas in North America, it's all dipping. Why? Because everybody does. Social pressure is really important. Society is changing. Ron just mentioned it. It has been mentioned this morning. It really is so that this whole antibiotic thing in our country is because the general public has an opinion. And we can say that they don't know what they talk about, but they do have an opinion. And we have to live with it. This is an advertisement in that I copied from one of our daily papers. And we have, some of you might have heard that we have an animal party in our parliament. And they're very popular. And their mission is to save the animals. And they come up with this kind of advertisements where they show the development of the dairy cow. This is the evolution of the dairy cow. This is how they see that we have our milking cows or dairy cows. And I don't agree, and I'm not happy, because all my career and of most of you, almost all of you, we've been working on this. This is how they see us. And it grieves us, but we have to live with it. We have to accept it. And there's only one thing that we can do, and that's doing our work good. But it is a fact. It has an effect on how we have to live and have to work. This is another one. It's an MRSA. If you come from a dairy farm, from a pig farm, and you go to a hospital, there is an alarm and you're isolated because of you have a risk of MRSA. Society is changing. We found out that MRSA, and the same is true for ESBL, in animals is different, and in farmers related to animals is different than in hospitals. This is how the approach is. The animal number, the antibiotic number, ADDD, it became a practical parameter. I was talking to a group of farmers a couple of years ago, 5-6 years ago, and this guy, his name is Simeon Schenk. He was in those days chairman of the LTO, the Farmers Association, and he was the chairman of the day. And I was giving a talk, and this guy is Piet Boer. He's also a farmer. He was then the chairman of Friesland Campina, which is our biggest dairy cooperative. And Piet gave a presentation, and Simeon, he introduced him, and first he said, that was the beginning of the day, and Simeon said, I have a dairy farm, I milk 130 cows, and my cell count is this, and I'm doing, it was all about udder health, etc. And my antibiotic number is 3.4. And then Piet come up, and he said, well, I have a dairy farm too, and such and such and such, and Simeon, my antibiotic number is lower than yours. And then I realized that this antibiotic number became a thing. It was in the mind of the farmers. They knew it, and they knew what it meant. And doesn't mean it's an ideal number, but it is a starting point. So it really helps in setting the social pressure. And that doesn't mean it's perfect. It also has a danger in it, that it becomes a goal in itself. That's one of the things that we're working on now, that some people want to go too low, that they want to have, that 2.2 is even better than 2.3. So that's another next challenge. But it really had an effect on what we think about antimicrobials, which was not the case in the past. Money, economics, is an important driver in behavior. It's a mistake, and many places I've talked all over the world, people say that my farmers only decide on money. That's the only reason they take decisions on. Which is true for some farmers, but for most it isn't. There are other reasons too. There are other things that influence their behavior too than money. But it is important. Saving costs is important. It's one of the reasons I think that selective dry cow was so successful in our country, because you don't have to buy dry cow antibiotics. 3 or 4 weeks ago I was at a funeral of some very old family member of us, and there was some nephew, an old man, dairy farmer, and he said, we had to do that, selected dry cow, but well, it saves us cost, and found out it works too. It does help. You don't have to buy them anymore. Out-of-pocket cost is very important for people. So tools, finally, the ADD, the antibiotic number, the benchmark, the formularies and treatment plans that have been made. I will not go into details because it will take too much time, but we had our formularies on antibiotic use, and every herd has to have a treatment plan on these things. The guidelines on selective dry cow treatment that were made by our veterinary association on what cows to be dried off with antibiotics and which one not. And altogether, that made up this program. So the reduction rules, the information programs, and all the things that I mentioned, the benchmark in the social pressure, saving of costs, the databases and the formularies in the tools, the antibiotic numbers. So both internal motivation as well as external motivation. And all those things together made that for every farmer there was somehow a reason to change their behavior. And that work, this is in Dutch, but it says that there is a huge reduction in antibiotic use also in cattle. Between 2009 and 2015, 47%. Coming to my conclusions, and I pretty close to 30 minutes, Dave. Behavior is not only influenced by ratio, nor only by money, nor only by social pressure, it's the whole thing. So if you think on talking to, as a veterinarian to your farmer, or if you as a farmer think of what do I think important, it's not only the scientific content. How important I think it. I've spent all my career on trying to work on evidence-based medicine and trying to think of why are we doing things. But real life is that when you have to take a decision, it's not the only thing that is important. To change behavior, this is meant to be behavior, different aspects of the reset model have to be changed at the same time. If you really want to reach a tipping point and to do things different, if the ATSA goal is to really decrease antimicrobial use, you have to do different things at the same time, just as I just tried to explain you. And what helped a lot in our country, and I've said it before today, is that we were forced by the government to change things. There was a rule, and the Secretary of State said you have to decrease with 50–70% of antimicrobials. And if you don't do it yourself as an industry, then the government will do it. And that was, of course, a sort of thing, a way we didn't want to go. So the effect of that was a cooperation between the different stakeholders in a country. There was a sort of steering committee, also on reducing antimicrobials in the dairy industry, where the veterinarians were in there, the dairy, the meat industry, the LTO, which is the Farmers Association, and this is not a Farmers Association. They all were together. I was part of that group, not as a stakeholder, but as a scientific advisor. And we worked together for almost 10 years, and only, 4 weeks ago or so, that steering committee was how do you say that, quitted, it was stopped. But due to the cooperation between the different stakeholders, sending the same message to all the people in the field, we could be successful. And with that, I'm done. I'm happy to take any questions, Dave, and thanks for your attention.